Family isn't about blood. At 78, Linda was finally living for herself, painting her sunrise-lit apartment in colors of her own choosing. She remembered the day everything changed like it was yesterday. She was sitting at her kitchen table, sipping chamomile tea, when her phone rang. It was her son, Ethan, calling for their weekly check-in. At 78, she had grown used to these perfunctory calls. They weren't warm exactly, but they were regular, a connection to the family she rarely saw anymore. "Hello, Ethan," she answered, trying to keep the eagerness from her voice. "Hey, Mom," he replied, his voice distracted as always. "How are you feeling today?" They chatted about nothing really. The weather, her garden club, his children's latest achievements. It was pleasant enough surface-level conversation that they'd perfected over the years. She told him about the new roses she'd planted, how Mrs. Edison from 2 doors down had complimented her front yard. He made appropriate noises of interest, though she could hear him typing on his computer in the background. "And how are the paintings coming along?" he asked, a question he always remembered to include, though he hadn't actually seen any of her watercolors in over a year. "Oh, just lovely," she said. "I'm working on a series of landscapes from the park. The art teacher says I have a good eye for composition." "That's great, Mom. Really great." The silence that followed felt heavy, expectant. She filled it as she always did, with questions about his work, about Clara, about the grandchildren. He answered each with increasing brevity. Her life had become so quiet since Andy passed. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway seemed to grow louder with each passing year. She had taken to leaving the television on just for background noise, though she rarely watched it. The garden club meetings on Tuesdays and her watercolor class on Thursdays were the highlights of her week, bright spots of human connection in the stretching emptiness of her days. Her small rancher was tidy and comfortable, but sometimes in the evenings she'd find herself wandering from room to room, touching Andy's things, his reading glasses still on the nightstand, his favorite sweater she couldn't bear to give away. The silence would press in, and she'd put on one of their old records, dancing alone in the living room to the songs they used to sway to together. "Mom, are you still there?" Ethan's voice pulled her back to the present. "Yes, sorry, dear. Just thinking about what to make for dinner. You're eating properly, right? Not just tea and toast." "Of course," she lied. Sometimes it hardly seemed worth the effort to cook for one. "Good. Well, I should get going. Conference call in 5 minutes." "Of course, dear. Same time next week." "Sure thing, Mom. Take care of yourself." The call ended, and she sat there holding the phone for a long moment afterward, as if some warmth might still emanate from it, some connection to her only child. She sighed and returned to her tea, now lukewarm. Outside, the afternoon light was fading, casting long shadows across her small garden. Another day nearly done. She hadn't always been this lonely. There was a time when this house, well, not this house, but their home, had been filled with laughter and noise. Sunday dinners with Ethan, Clara, and the grandchildren had been chaotic affairs, with Andy at the grill and everyone talking over each other. Daniela had been such a sweet child, always bringing her dandelions from the yard. And Reuben had followed his grandfather around like a devoted puppy, learning how to use tools and fix things. But that was before the cancer took Andy, before the silence descended, before her family became voices on a telephone rather than bodies around her table. She rinsed her teacup in the sink and glanced at the calendar on the wall. Garden club tomorrow. Something to look forward to, at least. She'd wear her blue cardigan, the one Nellie said brought out her eyes. Maybe afterward they'd get lunch at that little cafe on Main Street. Her sister was good about checking in on her, though at 83, she had her own health concerns to manage. As she prepared for bed that night, she caught her reflection in the bathroom mirror. When had she gotten so old? The woman looking back at her had Andy's wedding ring on a chain around her neck, silver hair in a neat bob, and eyes that had seen too much loss. She barely recognized herself sometimes. "Just you and me now," she whispered to her reflection, a habit she had developed in the years since Andy's passing. Sometimes talking to herself was the only conversation she had all day. Andy's diagnosis had come like a thunderclap on a clear day. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer, 6 months, maybe a year, with treatment. They had been planning a cruise to Alaska for their 50th wedding anniversary. Instead, they spent those months in and out of hospitals, learning medical terminology that no one should have to know, watching the strongest man she had ever loved wither away before her eyes. Ethan had been supportive at first, visiting regularly, bringing the grandchildren to cheer up their grandfather. Clara had organized a meal train with their church group. But as the months dragged on and Andy's condition worsened, their visits became less frequent. The kids have school, they'd explain. Work is crazy right now. She understood. Life goes on, even when it feels like yours is standing still. The last few weeks, Andy was barely conscious, the morphine keeping the worst of the pain at bay. She slept in a chair beside his hospital bed, holding his hand, telling him stories about their life together, reminiscing about the day they met at that USO dance in '62. His uniform so crisp, her dress so blue. "You were the prettiest girl there," he'd whispered during one of his lucid moments, his voice a shadow of the robust baritone she'd loved. "Still are." When he finally slipped away, it was early morning. She was dozing in the chair, still holding his hand. She felt the change before she opened her eyes. Some subtle shift in the universe as his soul departed. The nurse said it was peaceful, that he hadn't suffered at the end. She wanted to believe her. The funeral was well attended. Andy had been beloved in their community. Volunteer firefighter for 30 years, league coach, deacon at their church. Ethan gave a beautiful eulogy. Clara handled the reception afterward. The grandchildren, teenagers then, seemed awkward around her, unsure what to say to a grandmother transformed overnight into a widow. "We'll check on you every day, Mom," Ethan promised as the last guests departed. "You won't be alone in this." For a while, he kept that promise. Daily calls became every other day, then twice weekly, then settled into the Sunday afternoon ritual. The Sunday dinners continued for a few months, but gradually tapered off. "Mom, we're taking the kids to the lake this weekend." "Mom, Clara's parents are in town." "Mom, Reuben has a tournament." Valid reasons, all of them. Life goes on. She rattled around in their big 2-story colonial. A house meant for a family, not a solitary old woman. The stairs became increasingly difficult with her arthritic knees. The yard work that Andy had loved became an overwhelming burden. The property taxes were eating into her fixed income. When Ethan suggested she consider downsizing, it made practical sense. "You don't need all this space, Mom," he said, gesturing around the living room where his childhood photos still adorned the walls. "And the equity you've built up would give you a nice nest egg for retirement." The real estate market was strong that year. The house sold within a week, well above asking price. She found a charming single-story rancher in a quiet neighborhood with a manageable garden and no stairs to navigate. Ethan helped with the move, organizing which furniture to keep, which to sell, and which to donate. "What are you planning to do with the proceeds from the house?" he asked as they sorted through Andy's tools in the garage. "You should talk to a financial advisor. Make sure it's working for you." "I hadn't really thought about it," she admitted. "Put it in savings, I suppose." Ethan frowned. "That's not very strategic, Mom. Interest rates are terrible right now. You should consider some investments. Maybe a reverse mortgage on the new place to free up more capital." She was touched by his concern for her financial well-being. "I'll think about it," she promised. The move was exhausting, but liberating in its way. Downsizing meant confronting a lifetime of accumulated possessions, deciding what was truly important to keep. She found herself crying over the strangest things. Andy's collection of matchbooks from restaurants they'd visited, the children's height marks on the kitchen doorframe that couldn't be transported, the rose bushes he tended so carefully that had to be left behind. But her new home, though smaller, had its charms. A bay window perfect for her reading chair. A kitchen with updated appliances that made cooking for one slightly less depressing. A garden shed that she converted into a studio for her painting. She settled into a new routine, a new chapter of life she'd never planned for, but had to embrace nonetheless. Ethan seemed relieved once she was settled. "This is much more manageable for you, Mom," he said, surveying the compact living space. "And if you ever need help, we're just a phone call away." She believed him then. She had no reason not to. The first hint that something might be amiss came about 6 months after she'd moved into the rancher. Ethan called on a Tuesday instead of their usual Sunday. "Mom, I've been thinking," he began without preamble. "Have you updated your will since Dad passed?" The question caught her off guard. "No, I haven't gotten around to it." "Why do you ask?" "It's just good practice," he said smoothly, "making sure everything's in order. I have a friend who's an attorney, specializes in elder law. He could help you streamline everything, make sure your wishes are clear." "Elder law," she repeated, somewhat taken aback by the term. I'm not elderly, Ethan. I'm just experienced. He laughed, but it sounded forced. Of course, Mom. But it's still smart to have everything in order. I could set up an appointment if you'd like. She demurred, saying she'd think about it. The conversation left her vaguely unsettled, though she couldn't quite put her finger on why. A week later, Clara called, something she rarely did. Just checking in on my favorite mother-in-law, she said brightly. Ethan mentioned you might be feeling a bit under the weather. Did he? I'm perfectly fine. I hadn't mentioned any health concerns during our last call. Oh, maybe I misunderstood. How are you feeling? Taking all your medications properly? Eating well? The questions continued, probing into her daily routine, her health, her finances in a roundabout way. By the end of the call, she felt like she'd been interviewed rather than engaged in a conversation with family. Then the grandchildren started appearing. Daniela, now 22, showed up unannounced one afternoon, all smiles and flattery. Grandma, you look amazing. I love what you've done with your hair. They had tea in the garden, catching up on her life. She had dropped out of community college, was between jobs, as she put it, trying to find herself. As she was leaving, she hesitated at the door. Grandma, I hate to ask, but I'm in a bit of a tight spot financially. Just until I get back on my feet. Could you maybe help me out? $5,000 would cover my rent and expenses for a few months while I job hunt. $5,000 was a significant sum, but she was her granddaughter, and she looked so much like Ethan had at that age, with Andy's eyes and her stubborn chin. She wrote the check, feeling a warm glow of being needed, being useful to her family. 2 weeks later, she saw her in town, shopping bags from expensive boutiques hanging from her arms, a new hairstyle that must have cost hundreds. She didn't see her watching from across the street. Ruben was next, arriving with a business proposal rather than a direct request. At 25, he had his father's confidence and charm. It's a tech startup, Grandma, he explained, showing her glossy printouts with graphs and projections. We're developing an app that's going to change how people shop for groceries. The potential return on investment is huge. That sounds very impressive, she said, even though she understood little of the technical words he used. But I don't know anything about investing in startups. That's why you have me, he said, patting her hand. I wouldn't steer my favorite grandma wrong. $10,000 gets you in at the ground floor. You could double your money within a year. Again, she wrote the check, telling herself it was an investment in her grandson's future as much as her own. 6 months later, when she casually asked Ethan how Ruben's business was doing, he looked a little confused. Oh, that. It didn't work out. These things happen in the startup world. High risk, high reward. The next time she saw Ruben, he was driving a new sports car. Around this time, she met Jude at a community center dance for seniors. He asked her to dance to a Frank Sinatra song, and his old-fashioned charm caught her attention right away. He was 75, a retired engineer who had moved from Serbia in his 30s. His accent was still thick, his eyebrows were bushier than seemed possible, and his laugh was infectious. You dance like a much younger woman, he told her as they swayed to the music. Like a spring breeze. No one had flirted with her in years. She felt a blush creep up her neck. She felt young again in a way she hadn't since Andy's diagnosis. Jude asked for her number, and she gave it without hesitation. Their first date was a matinee at the old theater downtown, followed by coffee at a cafe where he knew the owner, another Serbian man who gave them homemade pastries. Jude told her about his late wife, about his children who lived on the West Coast, and about his life in Belgrade before moving to America. She told him about Andy, her painting, and her garden. They found a shared love of classical music and historical documentaries. He quickly became a regular part of her life. Museum visits on Wednesdays, dinner at his condo or her house on Saturdays, and day trips to coastal towns she had never visited even though they were nearby. For the first time since Andy died, she felt truly alive again, seen for who she was, not just as a widow. When she mentioned Jude to Ethan during one of their phone calls, his reaction was quick and concerning. Mom, you barely know this guy. How much have you told him about your finances? Nothing, she said, surprised. Why would I? We talk about art and music and travel, not money. You need to be careful, Ethan said firmly. There are a lot of scammers who target seniors. Lonely widows with savings are easy targets. Jude isn't like that, she said. He owns his condo, has a good pension from his career as an engineer. He's not interested in my money. But Ethan's warning planted a seed of doubt she couldn't fully ignore. The next time she had dinner with Jude, she found herself watching for signs of dishonesty, for clues that he might be after her money. There were none. But the doubt lingered, a small shadow over her happiness. Meanwhile, her sister Nellie had noticed how much more involved her family had become in her life. They never visited this much when Andy was alive, Nellie said during one of their weekly lunches. Now suddenly they're all so interested in your well-being. They're family, she said, trying to defend them. They care about me. Nellie, 5 years older and twice as sharp, gave her a look that showed she wasn't convinced. Just be careful, Linda. Not everyone has your best interests at heart, even family. She pushed aside her sister's worries as just part of getting older. But over the months, she began to see a pattern that was hard to ignore. Ethan and Clara's reaction to Jude shifted from concern to full-on disapproval. They started dropping by without warning whenever they knew he would be visiting. It created awkward moments, and Jude would quietly excuse himself. "We just worry about you, Mom," Ethan would say after Jude had left. "You don't really know this man. He's kind and respectful. We enjoy each other's company," she insisted. "Men his age are only interested in one thing," Clara added. "And it's not conversation." She was shocked. "I'm 78 years old. I think I'm past being taken advantage of that way." The comments didn't stop. They began to make small jokes about his accent, his background, and his intentions. Ethan would call whenever she and Jude had plans, suddenly needing help with something urgent. Clara would arrange lunches that clashed with her outings with Jude, forcing her to pick between them. Then Ethan said something that broke her heart. "Your relationship with this foreigner disrespects Dad's memory." She started crying. "Your father would want me to be happy. Dad would want you to be safe," Ethan said. She chose peace over happiness and ended things with Jude. The sadness in his eyes was painful to see. "They are wrong about me," he said softly. "But I understand. Family is important. If you change your mind, you know where to find me." After Jude left, her world shrank. It became just her home, her garden club, and her demanding family. The grandchildren's visits always ended with requests: money for car repairs, graduate school applications, and security deposits. She gave what she could, telling herself this was what grandmothers were supposed to do. Clara began admiring her possessions during visits. Andy's pearl necklace gift, her mother's silver tea service, their Waterford crystal wedding vase. "This would look perfect in our dining room," she would say, holding each treasure. Bit by bit, her precious possessions migrated to their home. She rationalized it. They would inherit these things eventually. Ethan's hints about financial difficulties became more direct. "Ruben's tuition is stretching us thin. The house needs a new roof." She began writing checks for their expenses, each time receiving less gratitude and facing more expectation. Nellie watched with alarm. "Linda, they're bleeding you dry," she said bluntly. "When was the last time they visited without asking for something?" "They're family," she repeated like a mantra. "Family helps each other." "Family doesn't take advantage," Nellie countered. Andy would be furious. She changed the subject, but in quiet moments alone in her increasingly bare house, she wondered if Nellie might be right. The months following her breakup with Jude were intensely lonely. She threw herself into painting, spending hours in her garden shed studio, expressing emotions she couldn't voice. Ethan's calls increased, always ending with financial matters. "Maybe we should consolidate your accounts, Mom. Clara and I could help manage things." She began feeling she was disappointing them by maintaining independence. Clara started monitoring her medication, suggesting she needed help remembering pills, or perhaps someone to check on you daily. "I'm perfectly capable of taking my own medications," she insisted. "There's no shame in accepting assistance at your age," Clara replied in a patronizing tone. The grandchildren's visits followed a pattern. Daniela would compliment her baking while explaining her latest crisis. "I hate to ask, Grandma, but I'm short on rent this month." Ruben would help with house repairs, then mention car trouble or credit card debt. Each time she wrote a check, feeling momentarily needed. But her savings dwindled while their circumstances improved. Kitchen renovations, new cars, European vacations. Ruben posted photos from Cancun. Daniela arrived with designer handbags. She cut back on luxuries. Lunches with Nellie became monthly. She canceled her symphony subscription, started shopping at discount stores. Nellie grew more direct with her warnings. They show up with empty hands and leave with full pockets. They're going through a rough patch, she defended weakly. Have they ever paid you back for anything? Nellie challenged. The truth was repayment had never been discussed. Money flowed one way, never to return. She began noticing the pattern. Her family always arrived empty-handed, yet never left without something. The internal conflict became unbearable. Maternal instinct to provide warred with awareness of exploitation. She thought of Jude more often, remembering his blunt assessment. You are being, how do you say it, milked like cow. At the time, she'd been offended. Now, she wondered if he'd simply spoken a truth no one else would. One afternoon, she found a photograph of Ethan as a child, proudly holding a fish he'd caught with Andy. His smile was genuine, his eyes bright with love. She stared at it, trying to reconcile that joyful boy with the calculating adult he'd become. The constant stress took a physical toll. Weight loss, insomnia, anxiety when the phone rang. You look exhausted, Nellie said during a rare lunch. This situation is killing you by inches. I don't know what to do, she admitted. They're my only family besides you. That doesn't give them the right to bleed you dry. Andy would never have allowed this. Andy isn't here, she said. And I'm not as strong as he was. Nonsense. You're every bit as strong. You just need to remember it. Something shifted inside her. If they were using her, the fault wasn't hers. She hadn't failed as a mother. She was being exploited by people who valued money over family bonds. She began saying no to financial requests. I'm afraid I can't help with that right now. The reactions were telling. Confusion, then irritation, then anger. But Grandma, you've always helped before, Daniela protested. My circumstances have changed. I need to be careful with my spending. The calls decreased. Visits nearly stopped. Ethan, however, became more persistent. Mom, are you feeling all right? Maybe we should stay a few days, help around the house. She deflected these offers while researching financial protections for seniors and consulting with Nellie's lawyer friend. She was preparing for whatever would come next, either giving in to their demands or forcing them to reveal their true intentions. It was a Wednesday afternoon when Ethan called outside their usual schedule. She was in her studio working on a watercolor landscape when her phone rang. She considered letting it go to voicemail. She was at a crucial point in the painting, trying to capture the exact quality of light through the trees. But years of maternal instinct won out. What if it was an emergency? Hello, Ethan, she answered, trying to keep the weariness from her voice. Hey, Mom, he replied, his tone unusually upbeat. How are you feeling today? They chatted about nothing really. The weather, her garden club, his children's latest achievements. It was pleasant enough, surface-level conversation they'd perfected over the years. But there was an undercurrent of anticipation in his voice, a barely contained excitement that made her uneasy. Finally, he came to the point. Oh, by the way, Mom, we're planning a special dinner next week for Ruben's birthday. You'll come, won't you? She was surprised by the invitation. It had been months since she'd been included in a family gathering. Of course, she said, genuinely pleased. What can I bring? Just yourself, Ethan said quickly. We're taking care of everything. It's at that new steakhouse downtown, the one Ruben's been wanting to try. That sounds lovely, she said, mentally calculating what she could afford for a gift. Linda's budget was tighter these days, but a birthday was still a birthday. Maybe a nice shirt or a book on that historical period he had been interested in recently. Oh, and Mom, Ethan added. His voice had that tone Linda had come to recognize, slightly hesitant, slightly apologetic. It was the tone he used before asking for money. Hate to ask, but could you transfer about $300 to Clara's account? The caterers need a deposit, and we're a bit short this month. She frowned, confused. I thought you said it was at the steakhouse, right? Yes, he said quickly. They have a private room for parties. That's what needs the deposit. It didn't quite make sense. Restaurants usually held reservations with a credit card, not cash deposits, but she let it pass. Of course, Ethan, she said. I'll send it right now. Thanks, Mom. You're a gem. Love you. Love you too, dear. She heard him move like he was about to hang up, but the call didn't end. Instead, she heard shuffling, then voices growing clearer, like he had put the phone down without ending the call. Did she fall for it? That was Daniela's voice, unmistakable, followed by a laugh that sent chills through Linda. Hook, line, and sinker, Ethan replied. His voice sounded different now, cold and hard. God, I'm so tired of these calls pretending to care about her stupid garden club meetings and those pathetic paintings she does. Well, keep it up. Clara's voice now came sharp as glass. The birthday dinner will be perfect. She's been feeling left out lately, so she'll definitely come and bring a gift, probably cash. You know how she is. Reuben chimed in, clueless as always. And we can bring up the reverse mortgage idea again. Dad says with the right pressure, she'll cave. Yeah, Dad's smart, Daniela agreed. Once we get her to sign over the house, we can move her into assisted living, somewhere affordable. The family home is too valuable to waste on her. She doesn't need all that space. She heard Ethan again. His voice was businesslike. We just need to be patient a little longer. The retirement account alone will set us all up nicely. Not to mention Andy's insurance money she hasn't touched. Should be used for family needs, not just sitting in some account. Mom's too stupid to see what's really going on. Always has been. Just like Dad said, weak and easily manipulated. Linda sat frozen at her kitchen table, teacup halfway to her lips, as 5 years of suspicious patterns suddenly became clear. The family she thought she had, the son she raised, the grandchildren she adored, had been playing her for a fool. She was nothing to them but a checkbook, a resource to be drained and discarded. The revelation felt like a blow to the chest, knocking the breath from her lungs. She ended the call with trembling fingers, but their laughter and cruel words kept echoing in her mind. She sat there as darkness fell, the teacup growing cold in her hands. She was trying to process the betrayal, going through stages of grief that felt horribly familiar, yet completely different from when she had lost Andy. This was a different kind of death, the death of her illusions, the death of the family she thought she had, and the love she believed in, even when the signs pointed otherwise. It hurt in ways she didn't know she could still feel. A pain that went beyond physical and into pure emotional suffering. What had she done to deserve this? Had she been a bad mother? A disappointing grandmother? Or was this simply who they had always been beneath the fake smiles and hugs? The questions swirled in her mind as night deepened around her. The house was quiet, except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, Andy's clock. It was the one thing she had insisted on bringing from their old home. It had always been the steady heartbeat of their life together. What would Andy do in this situation? The question came without her meaning to think it, but it brought clarity with it. Andy would never let himself be used like this. Andy would protect what they had built together. He would make sure their life's work wasn't wasted by people who didn't value it. Not just the money, but the love and sacrifice behind it. As the first light of dawn came through the kitchen window, she knew what she had to do. She had spent that whole night sitting still, barely moving from the kitchen chair as darkness faded and the gray morning light arrived. The betrayal felt like a weight on her chest, making it hard to breathe. She thought about how this grief compared to losing Andy. It was similar in some ways, but also very different. When Andy died, she lost someone who loved her no matter what. This was losing people she thought loved her, only to learn that their love had limits. Limits based on what she could give them, how much she was worth in dollars. The pain inside was hard to explain. These were not strangers. These were her own son, her grandchildren, her daughter-in-law. The same people she had cared for, made sacrifices for. How could she make sense of the Ethan who had sat by her hospital bed after her hip surgery, holding her hand and reading to her, and the Ethan who had just called her stupid behind her back? How could she understand the difference between the Daniela who once gave her dandelion flowers and handmade cards, and the young woman who laughed about tricking her own grandmother? Part of her wanted to confront them immediately, to call Ethan back and demand an explanation, to ask how they could treat her with such cold disregard. But another part, maybe the wiser part, knew that confronting them would only lead to lies, to gaslighting, to being told she had misheard or misunderstood. No, this needed a different plan. This needed strategy, not emotion. This needed her to be stronger than she had been in years. As the sun rose fully, casting long shadows across her kitchen floor, she made her decision. She would protect herself, her money, her dignity. She would not allow them to take anything more from her. Not her money, not her home, not her self-respect. The first call she made was to Nellie. Even though it was early, Nellie answered on the second ring, her voice alert. Her sister had always been an early riser. "Linda, is everything all right?" "No," she said simply, and then the words came pouring out. Everything she had overheard, every mean comment, every careful plan to take her money. As she spoke, Her voice became steadier, her courage stronger. Saying the betrayal out loud made it lose its power over her. Nellie was quiet for a long moment after she finished. Then I'm coming over. Don't do anything until I get there. She arrived within the hour, bringing coffee and her usual no-nonsense attitude. At 83, her sister was still a strong woman. Her white hair was cut in a neat bob, and her posture was straight like a soldier's, even with the arthritis that bothered her on rainy days. I should have listened to you, Linda said, tears finally coming as her sister hugged her tightly. You saw it all along. Doesn't matter now, she said quickly, setting down her purse and the tray of coffee cups. What matters is what we do next. They sat at Linda's kitchen table, the same table where she had gotten the painful phone call, and they made a plan. Nellie had always been the practical one, the planner, while Linda was more of a dreamer. Now, her sister's clear thinking was just what she needed. First things first, Nellie said, taking a notepad and pen from her purse. We need to protect your money right away. What kind of access does Ethan have to your accounts? Linda explained about the access she had given him to see her bank accounts. The credit cards where she had added them as authorized users. The joint checking account they had created for emergencies. Nellie made notes. Her handwriting was still very neat. All of that needs to be changed today. Right now if possible. But what will I tell them? Linda asked, still feeling stuck in her duty as a mother. Still worried about hurting their feelings even after everything. Nothing yet, Nellie said firmly. We fix your money first, then we think about how to talk to them. Linda, she said, holding her hands, her blue eyes so much like hers and their mother's, looking straight at her. Being kind is not weakness. It's their loss, not yours. We're going to fix this together. Her sister's confidence felt like a rope thrown to someone drowning. She held on to it, finding strength in her sister's certainty when she had none of her own. Okay, she said, sitting up straighter. Tell me what to do. The next few days passed quickly and were full of tasks. First, she called her bank and removed all the access she had given Ethan to her accounts. The person at customer service was kind but seemed worried. Mrs. Harmon, are you sure you want to remove your son from all these accounts? He's had access for a long time. I'm sure, she said firmly. Actually, I'd like to open completely new accounts and move my money there. I also want to change all my passwords and security questions. Next, she called the credit card companies where she had made them authorized users and removed their names. One person asked if she wanted to report any fake charges. No, she said after thinking for a second. Not fake exactly, just not right in spirit, even if not illegal. She blocked their numbers on her phone, changed her email password, and made an appointment with her own lawyer. Not Ethan's friend who worked in elder law, but Tina, a smart woman in her 50s who had helped Nellie with her affairs for years. Taking money from older people is sadly common, Tina told her during the meeting, her face kind but serious. It happens even more when it's family doing it. They have access. They have trust. And they often feel like they deserve the money. What can I do to protect myself? Linda asked. A lot, actually, Tina answered, picking up a legal pad. We'll start by making a revocable trust for your money with clear rules for your care. We'll update your will, remove Ethan as the executor, and name someone you trust completely, maybe your sister. We'll also set up a financial power of attorney and a healthcare directive naming someone else, not your son. And we'll write down this conversation and the reasons for the changes in case anyone questions your mental health later. The message was clear. Ethan might say she was mentally sick when he found out he had been cut off. That thought made her angry and very sad. Her own son would rather say she was crazy than admit he had done something wrong. That said everything about how bad their relationship had become. When the day of Ruben's birthday dinner came, she wasn't there. She sent no gift, no card, no reason why she didn't come. Instead, she was visiting retirement homes with Nellie. Not the cheap assisted living place Ethan had talked about, but nice places where she could live freely and safely. This one has an art studio for residents, the tour guide at Oakwood Village said, showing them a bright room with easels and finished paintings on the wall. Some professional artists live here, and they teach classes for all skill levels. Linda felt a little spark of interest, the first good feeling she had since the heartbreaking phone call. Do they have art shows? Gallery events twice a year, the guide said. And we work with the community college for special art classes. Many residents say they finally have time to enjoy art again here. By the end of the day, She had put down a deposit on a one-bedroom apartment with a small den that could serve as a studio. The community had 24-hour security, a dining room for when she didn't feel like cooking, transportation to medical appointments and shopping, and most importantly, a sense of community that had been missing in her life since Andy died. "Are you sure about this?" Nellie asked as they drove home. "It's a big change." "I'm sure," she said, feeling more certain with each passing mile. "I need a fresh start. Somewhere they can't find me easily. Somewhere I can build a new life." The emergency calls started that night. First Ethan, then Clara, then even Ruben and Daniela. Voicemails, text messages, emails, all pleading confusion, claiming misunderstanding. When she didn't respond, they started showing up at her house, knocking on her door at all hours. She stayed with Nellie until the moving van came. They hired a security service to oversee the packing and moving just in case Ethan or the others tried to interfere. They didn't. But Ethan's car drove slowly past Nellie's house several times during her stay, a silent reminder that this wasn't over. She called a realtor about selling her house on her terms. Once it sold, she put the money into the carefully structured trust Tina had set up with clear provisions for her care and specific instructions about who could and could not access the funds. The hardest part was changing her phone number, her email address, essentially disappearing from the life she had known. But it was necessary. As Tina had explained, sometimes the only way to stop financial exploitation is to remove yourself completely from the exploiter's reach. She left no forwarding address, no way for them to find her easily. It felt extreme, but after hearing their true feelings, their true intentions, she knew it was the only way to protect herself, both financially and emotionally. The day she moved into Oakwood Village was bittersweet. Nellie helped her arrange her furniture, hang her paintings, and set up her new studio space. The apartment was smaller than her house, but perfectly fine for her needs. The east-facing windows in the living room would be perfect for morning painting sessions. "You'll be happy here," Nellie said as they shared a cup of tea on her new balcony, overlooking a well-tended garden where residents were working among the flower beds. "I can feel it." "I think so too," she said, and she meant it. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of possibility. A future that belonged to her alone, not defined by what others wanted from her or expected of her. That night, alone in her new home, she cried for what she had lost. Not the money or possessions, but the illusion of family, the belief that she was loved for who she was rather than what she could provide. It was a necessary grieving, a letting go of what had never really existed except in her hopeful imagination. But as she unpacked her painting supplies, setting up her easel by the east-facing window where the morning light would be perfect, she felt something else growing alongside the grief. A quiet determination, a sense of reclaiming her life on her own terms. She was 78 years old, but she wasn't finished yet. Not by a long shot. Her new apartment in the retirement village faced east, perfect for morning painting sessions. The light streamed in through the large windows, lighting up her easel and the canvas she was working on, a landscape of the garden visible from her balcony. The colors were vibrant and alive in a way her earlier work had never quite achieved. It had been 6 months since she disappeared from her old life. 6 months of rebuilding, of healing, of discovering who she was when she wasn't defined by her relationships to others. Not as Andy's wife, not as Ethan's mother, not as Daniela and Ruben's grandmother, but simply as herself. Linda, artist, gardener, survivor. The transition hadn't been easy. There were nights she lay awake questioning her decision, wondering if she had overreacted, if there might have been some innocent explanation for what she'd overheard. But those moments became less frequent as she settled into her new life, building new routines, new friendships, new purposes. She reconnected with Jude, who, as it happened, took a dance class there 3 times a week. Their reunion was awkward at first. She was full of apologies for ending things so abruptly. He was gracious but wary. But slowly, they rebuilt their connection, stronger now for having gone through the separation. They were taking things slowly, enjoying each other's company without pressure or expectations. He made her laugh, challenged her thinking, and appreciated her art in a way few others ever had. "You paint like someone who has seen both beauty and pain," he told her once, while studying a landscape she had just completed. "There's honesty in your brushstrokes." She made new friends, too. Thelma, a retired English professor who led the book club. Damien, a widower who tended the community garden and shared his vegetables with anyone who showed interest. Sophia, a former ballet dancer who now taught gentle yoga to residents. They knew nothing of her past, of the betrayal that led her there. To them, she was just Linda, the new resident with a talent for watercolors and a love for Earl Grey tea. The financial protections she had put in place turned out to be necessary. Ethan found her eventually. Of course he did. He was her son. He knew her habits, her preferences. He showed up at Oakwood Village one afternoon, charm turned up to the maximum, a bouquet of lilies, her favorite, in hand. "Mom," he said when she met him in the community center rather than inviting him to her apartment. "We've been so worried. Why did you disappear like that? Why won't you return our calls?" She looked at her son, her only child, the baby she had nursed and nurtured, the boy she had taught to ride a bike and tie his shoes, the man she had helped through college and into his first apartment, and felt a mix of love and tiredness. "I think you know why, Ethan," she said quietly. "I don't," he insisted, his face a perfect mask of confusion and concern. "We've been frantic. Clara's been beside herself. The kids keep asking when they'll see their grandma again." "You forgot to hang up the phone," she said simply. "After you asked me for money for Ruben's birthday dinner. I heard everything. You, Clara, the kids. I heard what you really think of me. What you've been planning." His face went through a remarkable series of changes: shock, denial, calculation, and finally a kind of resigned acknowledgement. "Mom, you misunderstood. We were just—" "Please don't," she interrupted, her voice steady even though pain stabbed through her heart. "Don't insult my intelligence by lying to me now. I heard you call me stupid and weak. I heard your plans for my house, my retirement account, Andy's insurance money. I heard it all, Ethan." He stayed silent for a long time, his hands fidgeting with the cellophane around the lilies. "We're family," he said at last, as if that explained everything, as if it excused everything. "Yes, we are," Linda agreed. "Which is why it hurts so much to hear how you really feel about me. Family should be about love, respect, support, not exploitation." "We do love you," he protested, but it sounded hollow even to her ears. It was more of a reflex than something sincere. "Perhaps," she said softly, "but not enough to treat me with dignity. Not enough to see me as a person, instead of a resource." "What do you want from me, Mom?" he asked, frustration slipping into his voice. "An apology? Fine. I'm sorry. We all are. Now can we move past this? Come home. We miss you." "I am home," she said, gesturing to the community center around them, the garden visible through the large windows. "This is where I live now. As for what I want from you, nothing, Ethan. I don't want or need anything from you." The shock on his face was almost funny. The idea that she might not need him, that she might not be desperate for his attention and approval, clearly hadn't crossed his mind. "You can't be serious," he said. "You're just going to cut us off? Your own family." "I'm not cutting you off," she replied calmly. "I'm setting boundaries. If you want a relationship with me, it'll be on new terms. Terms that include mutual respect and honesty. No more financial requests. No more manipulation. No more treating me like I'm incompetent or stupid. And if we don't agree to these terms," he challenged, a hardness creeping into his voice, the same edge she'd heard during that phone call. "Then we don't have a relationship," she said simply. "It's your choice." He left without resolving anything. The lilies were left sitting on the table between them. She hadn't heard from him directly since. But Clara had called once. Her voice was sticky sweet with fake concern, asking if Linda was getting the help she needs. Ruben had sent a text suggesting they talk about what's really going on. Daniela left a voicemail filled with tears and complaints, saying Linda had abandoned the family. She didn't respond to any of them. The ball was in their court now. If they truly wanted a real relationship built on love instead of money, they knew where to find her. She wasn't holding her breath, but she'd left the door open, just a crack. Sometimes she thought about them, Ethan and the others. She wondered if they ever really loved her, or if she had always just been a resource to manage, a checkbook with a heartbeat. She hoped the grandchildren might grow up to be better people than their parents. Maybe they'd see how empty life could be when it's all about taking and never giving. But she didn't wait by the phone anymore. Instead, she focused on the life she was building now. She had joined a more serious art group. She'd even sold a few paintings at the community's biannual exhibition. She started volunteering at the local elementary school, teaching art to third graders who painted with joy and no fear. She had made friends who liked her for who she was, for her company, her conversation, her view of the world, not for what she could give them. She had learned something important. Family wasn't about blood. It was about respect and love without conditions or price tags. Nellie came by every week, bringing gossip and sweet pastries from the bakery she liked. Jude and she had dinner every Saturday. They took turns cooking or tried new restaurants around town. Damien brought her tomatoes from his garden. Thelma loaned her books she thought Linda would enjoy. Sophia had even talked her into trying yoga, even though her knees still ached. This was her family now. Chosen, not assigned by birth. Built on kindness, not duty or greed. It wasn't the life she expected at this age. It wasn't the future she'd planned when she and Andy sat on the porch talking about retirement, watching Ethan play with his kids on the lawn. But it was a good life. A life filled with purpose and pride. At 78, she was finally living for herself, painting her days in her own colors. The canvas of her remaining years was hers to fill. No longer a background for other people's needs. Now it was her own work of art, bright with new chances and rich with hard-earned wisdom. Each morning, when the sun came up and light filled her east-facing windows, she set up her easel. She picked up her brushes and began again. Stroke by stroke, choice by choice. She took back her life, her worth, her joy. And in doing that, she found a kind of freedom she had never known before. The freedom to be fully, unapologetically herself. It was never too late to start over.